NRATV with Grant Stinchfield.
Well, hi there, folks. Welcome to the program. Gangbangers are terrorizing Chicago. The violence is spiraling out of control, reaching levels we have rarely seen before. A person is shot in that city every 3 hours, murdered every 15 hours. The criminals are rarely caught. In fact, the murder solve rate hovers around 20% in Chicago. That's just 1 out of every 5 murderers are captured and convicted. The mayor's response is to skirt responsibility and blame it on citizens for not dropping a dime on the thugs terrorizing their own communities. He says these gangbangers will never be captured without cooperation from the community. That is true, but there's other problems with his statement. Here is the Week on Crime Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Okay, 2 times a charm here. In respect, he is right. He says that the city needs more morals and they need to step forward if they want anything to change. The problem with all of that, though, is he fails to take any responsibility himself. People need to speak up, yes. But you, Mayor, have the moral responsibility to make sure your citizens feel safe when speaking up. Right now, people do not. The police cannot guarantee a whistleblower's safety. For someone to turn violent, a gangbanger in, you would want them to have their safety guaranteed. There is no way to guarantee them safety, sadly. In Chicago, the law-abiding have virtually no ways to protect themselves. They have all been disarmed by your left-wing anti-American, anti-gun policies, Mr. Mayor. So before you start insulting the community you represent for not being brave enough to call police, you, Rahm Emanuel, are the real coward. You're not brave enough to allow your police to go on the offensive in these crime-ridden neighborhoods. You play politics with lives, and you should be ashamed of yourself. Now today, though, we get word that he will send 600 officers into these communities that are being plagued with violence. All of that is very good news, and a big thumbs up to the police department for finally doing exactly what we've been calling on for them to do for 2 years. So 600 officers moving into violent neighborhoods is great, and it will be relief for that community. But what the hell took them so long to do it? Well, the Morning Joe crew did what they do every morning, complain about our president and his policies. But they've now redirected their anger towards ICE agents. Princeton professor Eddie Glaude compared what ICE agents are doing at the border to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. This is outrageous.
In the 1850s, particularly 1850, there was the Fugitive Slave Law. And because the Fugitive Slave Law did what it did, suddenly the issue of slavery was nationalized. It wasn't just in the South. Now it was a moral question that even Emerson had to confront in Massachusetts. So now we have ICE, the crisis of ICE. We have people trying to protect their family members from being snatched from them. This fear that you talked about.
Yes.
How has ICE, this 248% increase of jail transfers, the 42% increase in arrests, how has this created a kind of moral crisis that is nationalized now?
You know, you've got to be very careful when you compare anything to certain things. The Holocaust, slavery, 2 of the worst times in world history. Comparing ICE agents to what was going on in 1850, which was absolutely wrong, is outrageous. First off, ICE agents are arresting illegals coming in here illegally. There are rules set up for how you cross into America. ICE agents are arresting those people. They are not snatching away people trying to stay with their families. They are rounding up people that have broken the law. And really, more importantly than that, is as you get convicted aliens in this country, convicted of other crimes, those are the people that ICE agents are going after as well. That is all but forgotten as well, too, that the crimes that many of these aliens are convicted of are doing great damage to the communities. Joining me now is the managing editor for the Media Research Center, Brittany Hughes. Brittany, great to have you back on the program. What do you make of those comments comparing all of this to slavery?
Well, it's insane. It's incredibly offensive, as particularly to the Black community, I would think. Look, ICE agents are enforcing our federal immigration laws. You can say you don't like the laws, but that's exactly what they're enforcing. These are immigration laws that have been on the books for many, many years now, and we finally have an administration that is willing to enforce them. Look, if you come here illegally, you are violating our immigration laws. No other country on earth would stand for that. Everybody's got their own immigration laws. We're simply enforcing them. And I want to share just really quick a story about what ICE has been doing this week. There was a man who crossed the border back in April with a young girl that he said was his daughter. He showed up to a tuberculosis screening with her in July. Turns out he wasn't related to her at all. She was his rape victim. She had been sexually abused any number of times, and ICE arrested him. He's sitting in a jail right now while everything gets sorted out. And this young lady is a victim of an open borders policy that promotes sex trafficking and kidnapping. That is what ICE does all day. They round up murderers, child molesters, rapists, kidnappers. The list goes on and on. All you've got to do is pop over to their website and see what they're doing all day. So this idea that it's the same thing as rounding up slaves, illegal aliens are not comparable to slaves in any way, shape, or form. We have an immigration system in this country. If you come here legally, we are happy to have you, and you can stay. It is so far from the same thing that it would be laughable if it weren't so sad to make the comparison.
You know, Brittany, slaves were not there by choice, not by a long shot. Illegal aliens are here by choice. They make the decision knowing full well what the ramifications are, and they especially know what the ramifications are under a Trump presidency, that he's going to be tough on immigration. And so, look, they get in the end what they know is a possibility of happening, and that is getting arrested at the border.
I mean, you can even see CNN themselves had to admit just a couple months ago they sent somebody to the border. They actually sent him to the Reynosa side of the border over in Mexico and had him talk to people who hadn't yet come across the border but were planning to do so. And he told them, he said, you know, you've heard that you might get sent back. You've heard that you might get separated from your children temporarily. You've heard these things. What is your response to that? And has it changed your decision to come across illegally? And even CNN right there on the border had to report that, look, the vast majority of them are saying that they're going to come anyway. You're exactly right, Grant. This is a willful decision. It is a willful choice, and choices have consequences. Our laws have not changed. We simply have an administration that is enforcing those laws, which is exactly something the previous administration shouldn't have done or should have done and didn't. And this administration is. And to compare ICE to Nazis, to compare them to, you know, those who rounded up fugitive slaves is so incredibly insulting. These are hardworking men and women who are on the front lines, who put their lives on the line. Some of them have lost their lives, you know, trying to apprehend incredibly dangerous people who come into this country illegally, and to protect not only American citizens, but other immigrants who are often the primary victims of illegal alien crime. That is who ICE is protecting. The only word I can keep coming back to is just incredibly insulting, and willfully ignorant.
Yep, it sure is. All right, so we talk about this whole Nazi nonsense. Clearly, that's a mantra of the left, to go after not just Donald Trump, but Trump supporters. The other day, Broadway stars had gone down and they sang in front of an empty house. President Trump wasn't even there. Talk about a new day. I would argue that they're singing a new day, that the new day is here, thankfully, and in large part to Donald Trump. Rosie O'Donnell was one of the organizers of all of this. She's been now making the rounds. Listen to this.
More people that show up here eventually will take over all of D.C. and they'll have no choice but to resign. Let the sunshine. Let the sunshine. He's a horrible human with no soul, and he has a very serious mental disorder. There are so many psychiatrists who are trying to get out the duty to warn. They wrote a book. This guy is in no means mentally stable enough to run this country, and he should be impeached, and every congressman who hasn't filed those articles should lose their job.
All right, they cannot give a reason of why he needs to be impeached. None of these investigations have found anything. You don't impeach somebody because you don't like them. All I can think of now when I look at Rosie O'Donnell is that she just hates this man for some reason, whatever it may be. And I really don't even think it's his politics right now. I just think she hates Donald Trump, and she has lost all sense of reason.
If she had any to begin with, I mean, it is Rosie O'Donnell. But, you know, I think that the primary thing here that you see is, again, and it's so sad to keep coming back to this, but they are still ticked off about an election that happened 2 years ago. They are still incredibly upset that they lost. And it's wild because, you know, elections have been won and lost throughout the history of this country. And this one, for some reason, they can't seem to let go. I think that's where this primary hatred of Donald Trump stems from to this day. And I find it interesting that, Broadway actors and celebrities are perfectly fine with alienating so much of their audience and so many people who would otherwise come to enjoy their talents, their singing, their acting, whatever, by standing and making fools of themselves in front of the White House. I think what you're seeing here is just typical Trump derangement syndrome. It hasn't abated. They can't give you a logical explanation of why. And what's really funny is that Trump's opinion, or the public opinion of Trump, has continued to rise. So clearly these celebrities, Rosie O'Donnell, Broadway, whoever, Alyssa Milano, they're so out of touch with how actual people live and what actually affects their lives and how they feel about Trump. I mean, Trump's approval rating at this point hovers between 46 and 48%, depending on which poll you look at. It's actually much, much higher than the liberal media would want you to believe. And so when they come out and they can't even give you a reason as to why they can't stand him, they just say things like, oh, well, he's mentally unstable. Well, no, actually, he's not. And quite frankly, you're calling a whole bunch of other people mentally unstable for voting for him by implying that he's just so crazy that nobody should ever like him. 63 million people voted for this man. 63 million people. And that's something that cannot just be simply discounted because you don't like the guy. So if she wants to stand there and rant and rave, then I guess that's her right to do so. We live in a free country where you're free to make a fool of yourself. But then they wonder why they're not resonating with the vast majority of America. Well, that's why. Because if that's all you have to say, it's not even worth paying attention to you.
Yeah, well, I'd like those Broadway stars to just look out in the crowd. It's about $500-600 to get a decent seat at a Broadway show these days in New York. There's basically no minorities that are going to watch any of these shows. It's all rich, white elitists that live on Park Avenue in the suburbs of Scarsdale, New York, and Chappaqua. Those who are going to Broadway shows, that's why they're out of touch with America. And, they'll keep doing what they do. We'll keep making fun of them for it. And I promise you, I think Republicans are going to keep winning elections. Brittany Hughes, it's great seeing you.
Thanks.
All right, we'll talk again soon. That's going to do it for us today here at Stinchfield. We will be back tomorrow at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. I hope to see you.
You're watching NRATV with Grant Stinchfield.